Henry's story, the founding of the Ford Motor Company. Since humble beginnings more than a century ago, the Ford Motor Company has evolved into one of the largest powerhouses in the auto manufacturing sector. In their time, Ford has produced pretty much every kind of car you could think of, from mass-market SUVs and station wagons for mom and dad, to rip-roaring big-block muscle cars that can dominate the drag strip. For many, Ford has singularly shaped the automotive world more than any other manufacturer in history. It's an impressive legacy, and a lot of credit can be given to a single man, Ford's founder, Henry Ford. Ford began his company inside a small garage in Detroit, Michigan, and eventually grew the Ford Motor Company into one of the largest and most influential automotive manufacturers in the world. Before becoming a household name, Ford had a diverse background in farming, machinery, and engineering, which he used to build the company into the powerhouse it is today. Buckle up and let's drive into the past to experience Henry's story, the founding of Ford. The early life of Henry Ford. The son of Irish and Flemish immigrants, William and Mary Ford, Henry Ford was born on July 30th, 1863, on a 90-acre farm in what is now Dearborn, Michigan. He was the eldest of 6 children and grew up working on his father's farm, plowing, planting, and harvesting. However, his real passion was in fixing objects, especially mechanical ones. Ford never really had much use for the Scotch settlement school he attended, preferring instead to build water wheels, steam turbines, and small coal-fired steam boilers. He started to create his own tools after finding farm instruments insufficient for his work. When he was 13 years old, Ford's father gave him a pocket watch, which he took apart and reassembled several times until he could understand how it worked. Growing up on the farm, all signs pointed to Ford continuing in the path of his father working in agriculture. However, everything changed in 1876 when Ford would see and experience 2 things that would forever change his life. That year, grieving the loss of his mother Mary, Henry Ford came into contact with a self-propelled vehicle for the first time. Later that year, he also saw a 1,600 horsepower coreless steam engine. He was infatuated by the steam-powered car that used a chain to spin the wheels, as well as by the gargantuan size of the coreless, which was 2 stories high. Ford would never be the same. Ford's early business ventures. In late 1879, at the age of just 16, Ford walked 6 miles by foot from Dearborn to Detroit, taking a job at the Michigan Car Company making railroad cars. After being fired within a week for outsmarting the senior machinists, Ford fell in with the Flowers brothers and got a job apprenticing at their machine shop. He also moonlighted at a jewelry shop fixing watches for extra cash. In the summer of 1880, Ford began working for the Detroit Dry Dock Company, where he saw an internal combustion engine for the first time. He worked in Detroit for a few more years, returning to Dearborn in 1882 to help his father on the farm. Back in Detroit, Ford began repairing steam engines for the Westinghouse Company, which were used for threshing on farms. A few years later, Ford attended Stratton Business University in Detroit, and in 1888 he married Clara Bryant after a 3-year courtship. Given a nice 40-acre farm by his father after marrying, Ford began trying to build an engine that would make farm life easier. While he failed in his attempt, it did prove useful in getting him to realize the futility of a steam-powered car, because the required coal or lumber would be impractical to haul around. He then switched his efforts into building a bicycle engine. Meanwhile, in 1891, Ford took up a job at the Edison Illuminating Company to supplement his farm income. Thomas Edison himself founded the company in 1880, and he would later become a lifelong friend and mentor to Henry. The young Ford quickly rose through the ranks at Edison and was promoted to chief engineer in 1893. That same year, while still working at Edison, Ford welcomed his first son, Edsel, and created his very first gasoline-powered engine. It was a 1-cylinder design made from a pipe, the handwheel was a lathe, and the carburetor was basically just a metal container. The spark plug ran off of the house's electricity, and Clara had to pour in the gas into the carburetor while Henry operated the intake valve. Ford's days in the engine business had finally begun. The first Ford automobiles. It's hard to imagine now, but at the turn of the century, the roads of Detroit were scarcely paved and still dominated by horse-drawn carriages. Of course, new transportation technology was beginning to take shape in the United States. The self-propelled motor wagon of the Duryea brothers hit the American roads for the first time in 1893, laying the foundations for one of the most revolutionary industries in history. Not far behind, Henry Ford invented his first proto-automobile 3 years later in 1896, the quadricycle. The quadricycle was 500 pounds and used a 2-cylinder engine made from a set of repurposed exhaust headers. He took his first ride on June 4th, driving up Bagley Avenue in Detroit, and later that year showed off his invention to Thomas Edison, the head of his company. In 1898, after getting the financial backing of the mayor of Detroit, William C. Newberry, Ford opened up his own machine shop and created his second proto-automobile that year. Newberry also issued Ford the first official driver's license in American history, and soon he was puttering about the streets of Detroit. The following year, in 1899, Ford created his third automobile, and also formed the Detroit Automotive Company. This marked his split with the Edison Company, and he took a full-time job as the mechanical superintendent of Detroit Auto. However, Ford was unable to keep up consistent production, and many of his cars were prone to early failure, and the company folded within 2 years. To start raising revenue to build more automobiles, Ford built a 2-cylinder, 26-horsepower race car, and competed with it on October 10, 1901. He won the race, winning $1,000 in prize money. Getting his previous investors on his side, he started the Henry Ford Company a few months later. However, after disputes, he quickly resigned from the upstart auto firm, which would be renamed months later as Cadillac. Not being able to afford another failure, Ford needed his next enterprise to succeed, or he would be finished in the auto world. The founding of the Ford Motor Company. Joining forces with bicyclist Tom Cooper, Ford created another race car for the manufacturer's Cup Challenge in 1902, which again won first place. This led to backing Alexander Y. Malcolmson. Soon, Henry and Alexander formed the Ford and Malcolmson Partnership in 1902, and they created an auto assembly plant from the remnants of an old wagon repair shop later that year. In February 1903, Ford entered into a partnership with the Dodge brothers, John and Horace, who were then starting their own small auto manufacturing business, the Dodge Brothers Company, now known simply as Dodge. The Dodge brothers built the chassis, engine, and transmission for Ford, while the C.R. Wilson Carriage Company supplied the body and cushions. The Pruding Company supplied the wheels, and Hartford Rubber the tires. It cost $650 to $700 to produce, and would sell for $750 to $850. On June 16, 1903, Henry Ford led a group of investors and created the Ford Motor Company. Their first car was the Model A, which immediately hit the sales floor. Soon, the plant was working 7 days a week for 16 hours a day to meet sales. By March 31, 1904, Ford had produced 658 cars and made nearly $100,000 in profit. And then demand started to skyrocket. After the Model A came models B, C, F, K, and N, before the Model T first rolled out in October 1908. As cars became cheaper, sales skyrocketed, and Ford went from making 20,000 cars in 1910 to 600,000 in 1916. Profits jumped accordingly from $4.1 million to $57.1 million over the same time. The first Ford assembly line with one worker performing one operation as part of a chain debuted on April 1st, 1913. Within a year, assembly took just 5 minutes per unit, and the auto revolution was well underway. The legacy of Henry Ford. The story of Ford Motor Company is not just the story of an automotive giant. It's the story of a visionary entrepreneur whose passion and determination revolutionized the automotive industry and changed the world. Coming from humble beginnings and growing up on a farm, Henry Ford shattered any possible expectations that could have been imagined for him. By introducing the Model T and implementing assembly line production techniques, Ford not only revolutionized the automotive industry, but also changed the way products are manufactured worldwide. Today, Ford is a global company that employs over 190,000 people, sells millions of vehicles every year, and generates over $158 billion in annual revenue and $23.6 billion in annual profit. Oh, and they make this. If you made it this far, please consider hitting that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more automotive history related content.